Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Something that didn't sit right with me and many other Canadians in the aftermath of the Air Canada strike fiasco was just why the Liberal government acted so fast. We have seen the Liberals in previous times where there have been strikes be very slow, not forcing a resolution, letting the strike go on for weeks and weeks, disrupting things like packages being shipped around the country. And maybe someone could argue because this was disrupting flights and it was stranding people around the country. That's why the Liberals acted so fast. It's not really in their character. And so today I've brought on a friend of mine from Diverge Media, Greg Staley, to try and explain maybe why Mark Carney would be so motivated and his ministers in order to jump into the situation and try and come down on the side of Air Canada so quickly. I don't think that you and I are anti Air Canada, Greg, or pro QP Union. But just to explain why the Liberals are acting very out of character is, I think, something that's needed right now.
Yeah, so there, we uncovered some financial incentives, and in the grand scheme of things, yeah, it might be not be a huge amount, but the other thing it shows is that there's obviously friendships and connections with people in the industry. Brookfield's heavily invested in aviation. They brought in the former they brought in the former Air Canada CEO to be an advisor on aviation. So there's those friendships, those connections, and I'm sure they're just a phone call away if somebody wanted to give Prime Minister Carney a call and say, "Hey, it's been like 10 hours. Let's end this thing already." I think they could have done that.
This sounds like a bit of a strange thing to bring up in this discussion, but I do think it's relevant. So, the one Liberal MP who actually spoke out against the government's decision to try and force flight attendants back to work so quickly was Nate Erskine Smith. Now, you'll remember when Carney first became prime minister before the election was called, he made Nate Erskine Smith the housing minister to entice him back to running for the Liberal Party. He was going to retire or move on to some other form of politics or another, go into media. He runs his own podcast. And so they made him the housing minister. And right after the election, they replaced Nate with the former mayor of Vancouver. I forget the man's name. It doesn't really matter. He's deeply incompetent. Nobody should know who he is. But but what I always got from that is that Carney likes people that he likes. People that he's friends with, people he's known a long time. He trusts those people more than someone like Nate Erskine Smith, who, maybe I don't like his housing solutions, but, compared to the former mayor of Vancouver, was probably going to be more competent. And what it feels like in this Air Canada situation is that Carney is jumping into the aid of people that he's known for a while, people, companies he's interacted with, it's close to his heart. Again, Brookfield is working with a former Air Canada CEO, and then you wonder why the call goes through to Air Canada so fast. But you were telling me something earlier before we started recording about how there's an actual call where Air Canada had no clue what they were going to do unless Carney just did it all for them.
Yeah, so there's a leaked phone call, and basically the conversation was, "Hey, you guys need to step in because we really don't have a plan for this." Less than 12 hours later, Carney's stepping in using government legislation. And like you said, like the Liberals are traditionally kind of the union party alongside the NDP. And why did they flip so hard, so fast on that when it's a political nightmare for them? Like now they're trying to recover. Like you mentioned on your show the other day, they single-handedly in this blunder have given the NDP life and wind in their sails that they didn't otherwise have. And it's not like the NDP were some great, they didn't have some great strategy to be relevant again. They just got handed this on a silver platter. And now what are the Liberals have to recover from this? But I think they've damaged the brand. And now you got to question. I mean, every time we see this prime minister move, what are the friendships and behind the scenes? Where's the financial motives? And you just kind of question, like, is any of this being done with the interest of Canadians in mind, or is this self-seeking and serving of the inner circle?
And naturally, you're never going to be able to get a conclusive answer on this unless Carney just comes out and says, "Oh yeah, that's totally how I operate." But with what we've seen just so far with him, back when he was an advisor to Justin Trudeau, an economics advisor, and then after becoming prime minister, there's just a pattern of what he chooses to intervene on, what he chooses to make his big policy initiatives. It's like modular homes. We're going to solve the housing crisis with modular homes. Brookfield happens to have be involved in modular homes. And is it the dollar amount that he's doing this for in order to benefit Brookfield? Well, and you can go, I want you to go into the specific aviation industry connections between Brookfield and Air Canada a bit. And it's not the most amount of money, but that's not really the point though. But there's a macro pattern of him choosing to benefit industries that Brookfield is invested in. They are heavily invested in a lot of government subsidized industries, green tech, batteries, EVs. At one point, they tried to buy a pharmaceutical company in Spain that just happened to be getting very cheap blood plasma from Canada Blood Services. It feels like in every situation, there is some Brookfield inside angle where they get information before anyone else, and things just happen to be able to move in their direction. Sometimes just in a policy standpoint where other companies benefit too, but it's always macro benefiting Brookfield, who oftentimes is invested in industries where if it wasn't for the government, they would be failing. But what's the connection with between Brookfield and Air Canada?
Yeah, so just to quickly outline this, it's detailed in our article that we just released the other day. But Brookfield, obviously, the Prime Minister has holdings there, and what this would look like for his personal holdings, again, we don't know. But obviously, there's friendships and connections in this industry. Brookfield holds approximately a 13.2% stake in a company called Chorus Aviation. And Air Canada also holds a stake in Chorus Aviation of about 10%. So there's the converging of interest there. But Brookfield invested $374 million into Chorus Aviation. And under Chorus Aviation, their subsidiary is a company called Jazz. And they operate, from what I can see from the Air Canada website, over 50 airplanes in the Air Canada fleet. So that's just on the financial side. But obviously, you have these connections and these friendships in that industry. And are you going to screw over all your friends? And assuming the best of the Prime Minister, obviously Canadians come first, but let's just assume he wants to be a good friend here. He has a lot of incentive to do things that are good for his friends that aren't good for Canadians.
Yeah, and that's where I think people overestimate or underestimate. I mean, just how much of a conflict that can be of just knowing too many people in the industry. There was a lot of hubbub around Nigel Wright back when he was the chief of staff of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. When he was coming in, they were really like, there were people freaking out because he had a lot invested. He was a former board member of an aviation company that I believe dealt in actually military type jets and other sort of like hardware like that. And that they were thinking that this is too much of a conflict of interest. So he actually recused himself from dealing with anything to do with anything aerospace, even if it didn't have to do with the company that he came from specifically. And that's the problem we have with Carney's. At every single topic every issue that he tackles, he's going to know three people who run companies in that area. He's going to personally know the board. He's going to have worked with people from Air Canada. And so this makes it everything he does, and I'm not trying to be unfair to him, everything he does becomes a little bit suspicious when the Liberals have a certain reputation for not moving fast when it comes to breaking up strikes, and then they suddenly do when it's a company where Carney feasibly knows a lot of people who are still currently at the company, a lot of people who've formerly been at the company. And so I think the solution to all of this is that what the Conservatives had been suggesting, the man needs to sell his assets and have them reinvested in a true blind trust. I believe he has around $7 million in Brookfield right now. And people can quibble and say, well, that's not that much of money when you compare it to people who are uber wealthy. It's like, yeah, but it's a lot for him. That's the problem. People can be corrupt for different amounts of money.
Oh, we know personally just from doing the independent media thing, like it doesn't take a lot of money to corrupt people. And also sometimes it's not even money. Sometimes it's just attention, adulation. And it's all it takes for some people. So in Carney's case, it's, again, how do you recuse yourself from things as a prime minister? Yes, you can sell your assets and still put them in a blind trust, but then there'll still be all these relationships. And again, does he turn around and hurt his friends in order to benefit Canadians? Well, he didn't even live here prior to the election, so it's not like he was a Canadian patriot in my eyes, anyways.
You cannot overstate just how badly they screwed up the Air Canada strikes, in the sense that it wasn't like it was the not ideal way of dealing with it. It was the worst possible thing they could do. Force people to go back to work with no promise that any issues are going to be fixed. And then Patty Hajdu, the Jobs and Families Minister, comes out later after forcing people back to work. I think Air Canada actually had to be the one to finally fix the situation by trying to offer some sort of mediation themselves. But regardless, she then comes out with a video saying we support workers. It's like, oh goodness, lady, this is just pouring so much salt on this wound. How about you just pack it in, take the L. They have revived the NDP. I think that is just unquestionable that the NDP got a lot of juice out of this particular situation, and now the Liberals are, again, I cannot, because the thing is, I keep hearing that Carney's a man with a plan. He's politically he's an astute political thinker, very intelligent. And then when we're in this situation with Air Canada, the Liberals act like a bunch of, not thugs, but they just act stupid. Like they just act rashly. It's an emotional decision almost. They do it in a second without even thinking about it. And again, it goes against the character that Carney presents himself as a very careful and deliberate economic planner.
Can I address the Carney perception about this super intelligent man with a plan? I think the man has lived in a bubble for much of his life where he never had outside people challenge him. He's usually been the guy, I think, at the table who was told, yeah, that's a great idea. You're right. And that's just not how it works in politics. And all of a sudden, hey, I can't just ram through things because I think it's the best thing to do. There's repercussions to my actions politically for not just me, for all my MPs. And if this rolls down, and then the perception is like, I don't think he's ever been really tested on a lot of his ideas. I'm not, he's obviously a sharp man. But that being said, if you've read his book Values, you'd go, well, this is like a dystopian, idiotic, like what kind of crap is this? Like, have you thought through what this actually looks like? So either he's so ideologically driven, which I'll address in a moment, that he just doesn't care, or he really hasn't thought through these things. And I don't think he's ideologically driven as this green elitist that people paint him out to be. He's invested in oil and gas. He's invested in coal. They are playing both sides of this green agenda where, hey, heads we win, tails we win. If they monopolize more and more of the market because of government policy that forces more and more small and medium enterprises out, it only benefits companies like Brookfield that have their investments in big companies like that because there's less market for them to have to compete with, and it's better for them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I wanted to move on to the onto what you're actually currently writing a new article about, because I'd heard that and it sounded interesting to me, and I was going to link both the one you currently did on the connections between Carney, Brookfield, and Air Canada, and then I want to link this other one. But what's this new one about?
Yeah, so just going through government grants and contributions, there's been $14 billion awarded. I believe it started in 2024. It goes into 2032 to Next Star Energy, which is a EV battery production plant in Windsor. Stellantis and LG combined on this. But at the end of the day, I just point out, listen, that's $14 billion. That's insane, first off. Secondly, sales, as soon as the government stops injecting money for subsidies for EVs and ZEVs, zero emission vehicles, the sales fall off a cliff. People don't actually want these, but when the government will subsidize, 10, 20, 30% of the price, I think it goes, Quebec's program is up to $7,000 on, I want to say electric vehicles. I'm not sure on that, but they watch sales in Quebec as an example, which drives the sales of the whole country, drop by 65% when the subsidies dried up. People don't want these.
This is what drives me up the wall of whenever people act like Mark Carney is like an economic genius. Yes, he actually did do a good job when he was the Bank of Canada governor, because he was listening to Stephen Harper and Jim Flaherty, because the governor of the Bank of Canada, is supposed to be a seasoned person in finance, but at the end of the day, they are supposed to align their monetary policy with what the government is doing. So if Harper and Flaherty want to be careful going into the 2008 financial crisis, and they don't want to inflate the currency and blow out spending and cause prices to rise, and they want to kind of ease, it'll put a little money into the economy to kind of be able to spur it, but keep it very low, much more minimal compared to what then Barack Obama proceeded to do in the United States. Carney did that, and he did a good job. Once he becomes the Bank of England governor, he has all the answers now. And then he actually ends up causing them a lot of problems that former Prime Minister Liz Truss has talked about, that he has all the answers and he's going to tell you what, the actual government's policy should be. So he starts trying to run the government from reverse, where I'm going to tell you what my monetary policy is going to be, and you're going to align with me, or I'm going to throw you all under the bus and quit. Because this is right after Brexit, and people like David Cameron are, nervous to make any big mistakes after that. And so, then Mark Carney's effectively able to dictate high inflationary spending type financial policy because he sees that as really good for, like the stock market, because he's like the Brookfield guy, he's like the Goldman Sachs guy. And by the way, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these companies other than I don't like companies just investing in government subsidized areas. But the thing is that he almost has a very bubble like view of, well, stock market go up. When he's Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, it's not shocking that we have a very high immigration rate that pumps the GDP and helps the stock market, but it's terrible for the average person.
Yeah, that's the thing. Just because your GDP is going up doesn't mean the average Canadian is going to benefit. You can increase GDP as the Liberal government has over the last decade, barely, but entirely driven by immigration. And that doesn't help anyone. That actually hurts a lot of people in the process. When you just look to housing, job market is another example of all these things that are being affected by it. But it's funny, back to the Flaherty and Harper thing. It's kind of like, to use a baseball analogy, Harper's the pitcher and he threw a perfect game through Flaherty calling the game, and Carney's over on first base and he never touched the ball, but he gets credit.
Yeah,
like he's just there. But even maybe a better analogy is he's not even on the field. He's in the dugout writing down the stats of the game, and he somehow gets credit for that from the Liberal side of the media. And as was pointed out by the Conservatives, you don't deserve credit here. You were beholden to the ideas and strategy of Stephen Harper and Flaherty. So I guess pat yourself on the back, but a better look would be what happened in England when he was the Bank of England's governor, and what they had to say about what he did there. And the reviews weren't great.
And going on to that more of that battery issue, the thing that, again, gets under my skin about this is that and you're going to have a lot of people thinking, oh, look at all these companies moving into town. Oh, look at all these new battery plants. And, by the way, Brookfield has several investments in battery companies. Not saying it's this one, but it's like every single you just look at the investment list of Brookfield. It's like these are the areas of the economy where, even if it's not Brookfield run, this is the type of companies that Mark Carney appreciates the most, which is, I think, the ideological side of Mark, that he likes battery plants, he likes solar and wind, and he likes, EV vehicle manufacturing plants being put into like Windsor. Like, it's like we're having an economy that's driven by his personality, much the same way that kind of Trudeau drove the personality almost in a childish way of what companies he likes, what industries he likes and doesn't like. But this is not how you build an economy. If the government money, yes, sometimes the government gives out a loan to bring in a big company to set up shop here. But if they're only going to be here in the long run because you keep writing checks, it's fake jobs. You are creating fake jobs to create products that nobody wants unless they're also able to write them off their taxes, which that's oftentimes what we do with EV vehicles in Canada. Now we have this EV mandate that at least the Conservatives are pushing back on. And I hate whenever people, when you start talking about the EV mandates, they're like, oh, so you don't think people should buy EVs? You don't think people should be able to buy EVs? Like, what are we talking about? It's a mandate. I think people should be able to, get gas and diesel fueled cars.
Well, let's go to the heart of that, because now I'm fired up. This is exactly the point on corporate welfare. You're picking and choosing arbitrary winners and losers every time you do this. Every time you do this, you're disincentivizing true innovation. And let's back this up here on this EV thing. If it is so appealing to have EV manufacturing here in Canada, why weren't the automotive manufacturers lining up to get into the market? Turns out they think it sucks. And if you look at the sales, if you look at what happened in Cami recently, what is it? The Light Bright, I can't remember, their EV. They just laid off 500 employees. They sold less than 300 vehicles in 3 months. Nobody wants these.
By the way, they do all that. They lay people off at the same time they're still getting subsidies and and tax breaks. And like we don't even get any real solid commitment from these companies to keep people employed if we're going to be giving them money. Like they end up just obviously using that money for other things in the company, and then they just fire people, and then there's no expectation that if we're going to
no recourse. There's no
if we're gonna give
recourse
you
to the taxpayer.
If we're going to give you millions, if not billions of dollars, you better keep people employed at the very least. Goodness. Stop, I don't care if you want to retrofit your corporate offices. I really don't care if you have some other sort of like, if any of these companies have a DEI program and then they fire people at the same time we're giving them billions of dollars. I'm like, goodness, that's called fraud. But and then you live in Saskatchewan too, so I assume that you're not super excited by them trying to shift people over to electric vehicles.
Okay, when I defended Pierre Poilievre on this because he's 100% right when he says the banning of gasoline-powered vehicle sales by 2035 will lead to the end of rural life. He is 100% correct, because if you live truly rural, even not like that rural, like I'm 30 minutes from the nearest town, there's no transit out here. There's no taxis that will come out here. And furthermore, I have never been able to afford a new vehicle in my life or put something on payments. Now, the used vehicle market over the next 20 years is going to look more and more electric. And go look right now how many electric vehicles are for sale. I think I seen 18 in the entire province of Saskatchewan last time I looked. There's not a lot of them, and none of them were affordable in my price range. I'm driving a 21-year-old vehicle right now.
They're all being driven in Saskatoon and Regina as well.
Yeah, and I'm driving a 21-year-old Toyota out there with 370,000 kilometers on it. Still runs like a top. Yeah. I think that's better for the environment to keep that bad boy ticking, not drum up all this new rare earth that's required and all the manufacturing materials. Let's just keep that going as long as possible.
By the way, have we increased the grid capacity of any of our cities enough that we can just have everyone plugging in Cybertrucks? Yeah. And to make another point about Tesla, I know that people can point to, well, Tesla isn't a successful company and they sell EVs. And a few successful companies in an industry does not prove that the industry has the capacity to be at the size that it currently is. Even Tesla arguably wouldn't be as big unless they had that the electric vehicle subsidy in the United States and in other countries, where if you buy a Tesla, you get to write off like $15,000 of it off of your taxes. I'm not sure if it's that much, but I remember it was a pretty massive portion of the cost of the vehicle. And so we don't have so even with Tesla, though, let's say that generally, if you got rid of all these subsidies, it'd still be a pretty successful company. Okay, that doesn't prove that this is an area of the economy where you need dozens and dozens of companies creating their own EV vehicles and trying to sell them on the market. There are niche products. There are niche industries that serve a niche audience. You can't take a niche product and try and make it mainstream. Look at all the failed products of the 1980s and 90s trying to sell like really strange computers on an open market that the general public did not want. You had to wait a while before you made a computer that was actually usable by people who aren't accountants or computer, people who code. And again, with the grid, we're going to have brownouts. We're going to have blackouts. If you end up having to have, I believe when you actually charge a car, it's like more than your entire house for like multiple days of power usage. Yeah, you don't have your car plugged in every day, but it's crazy how much power it takes.
On that rolling blackouts and brownouts thing, it was actually, I think, when Trudeau was in government, 2021, I did an article on this. Futures I can't remember who put it out, but it was a government agency that put out they foresee potential rolling blackouts as a result of climate change and trying to reduce carbon footprints. So I don't know if they think these two are hand in hand. They didn't point out that, but it does seem like energy insecurity is in the plan, or at least how they foresee the future. And it definitely doesn't need to be this way. And what's frustrating is we live on we're in the richest nation on earth, and we're watching it be pulled apart piece by piece. Nothing's being developed. There's no reason Canada can't have its cake and eat it too. We could have the best socialized healthcare in the world. We only got 40 million citizens. Think of how much money's underneath their feet. But 10 years of this government refusing to do anything in the name of some green ideology that is absolute nonsense to anyone who actually looks objectively at what they're saying. Look up Toxic Lake in China. Where's your EV battery minerals come from? They come from places like that where they don't give a rat's, you know what I mean, about environmental regulations, yet we're supposed to applaud the government and give pats on the back because they want to spend $14 billion on corporate welfare to bring in a company to produce this garbage.
Hmm. And so I think with that, well, I'd love for you to tell people what else you're working on, and I'd love to have you back on. But yeah, we should have you on just to talk about the EV stuff and all the green tech subsidies when your next article is officially out. But where can people find you?
Yeah, would love to do that. Yeah, you can find my work at divergemedia.ca. I think we're on Twitter as Diverge Media underscore or something. You'll find us, Diverge Media. Look for our logo, purple D with I think the maple leaf in between it. If I got
It
the updated
depends.
version.
Sometimes I load up your website
Yeah.
and the maple leaf's not there, and sometimes it's there. You know, Greg becomes patriotic depending on the day of the week.
I just don't know enough to go into the back end and fix a lot of it. That's what it comes down to.
Oh, no, I suck with computers. No, but thanks for coming on. I'll have your two articles linked in the description below this video, as well as pinned at the top of the comments. And I encourage you guys to all check out Greg's website. He's probably one of the best researchers in Canadian independent media right now. I kind of see you as like another Alex Zoltan, and you even look like Alex Zoltan a little bit.
I think he's a little bit thinner and better looking, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anyways, thanks for coming on, Greg. And
Thanks
to
for having me.
everyone watching, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. I will see you guys all later.